Well, good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to Thai DC's GovCon 2020 conference. My name is Raj Patil. I'm a board member of Thai DC, and I'm also on the organizing committee of the Thai DC GovCon conference. In the daytime, I'm also a CEO of a technology company, AEEC, American Consultants. We offer technology solutions to the US government and public sector clients. Thank you for joining this morning's session. Very interesting topic on the discussions of emerging technologies. So today we will have a discussion on various topics such as blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data provenance, data governance, etc., and how it all kind of relates to the public sector and and the implications it has on businesses in general. So it is my honor to host our distinguished panelists for this discussion today. With us today, I will start from your left to right, Dr. C. Mohan, Dr. Peter Linhier, and Dr. Sid Dalal. I'll just give you a very brief background of each of these panelists. Dr. Mohan is currently a distinguished visiting professor at Tsinghua University in China. He's also an advisor to the Kerala Blockchain Academy and the Tamil Nadu e-governance agency in India. Mohan recently retired from IBM after 38 and a half years working as an IBM research fellow at the IBM Research Center in Silicon Valley. Mohan has 50 patents that is the inventor of, and Mohan's received his undergraduate degree in chemical engineering from IIT Madras and a PhD degree in computer science from University of Texas in Austin. Mohan is joining us today from Silicon Valley. So welcome, Mohan.
Thank you.
Peter. Peter is a senior research fellow at Harvard Business School, and he also serves as an adjunct faculty at Columbia University. He's the co-founder and a former chief science officer of Colibra, which is a unicorn venture in data intelligence software. This company is spun off of Peter's PhD research, and it also happens to be the first Belgium company that has achieved a valuation of $1 billion. Peter serves as an expert to the European Commissions, and prior to co-founding Colibra, he was a professor at University of Amsterdam. Peter received his master's and PhD degree in computer science from Rahe University in Brussels. Peter is joining us today from New York City. Welcome, Peter. And by the way, Peter and I know for many years through our work that we do with the Block Lab at the San Diego Supercomputer Center. Next, we have Dr. Sid Dalal. He's a professor of practice at Columbia University in the Applied Analytics and Statistics Department. Prior to joining Columbia University, Sid was the chief data scientist and senior vice president at American International Group, also known as AIG. And prior to that, Sid has worked with Rand Corporation, Xerox, and also at Bell Labs. Sid has over 100 peer-reviewed publications, patents, and monograms in this area of emerging technologies. And I think, I think I would be amiss if I don't mention Sid is well known for his significant contributions that he's done with the Space Shuttle Challenger accident, where Sid back in the 80s utilized data science or statistical methods to do the analysis, and that was on behalf of the National Academy of Sciences. Sid is also serves on the Army Science Board, which is a board appointed by the Secretary of Defense. Sid received his PhD degree in statistics and MBA in marketing from University of Rochester, and Sid is joining us from New York City. So again, thank you all for joining here. As you can see, not only these three panelists are, world's leading scholars in this domain and expertise in these leading technologies, but they also have a very deep industrial and public sector working experience. So with that, we'll start off with the discussion with Mohan, with his expertise in databases and blockchain technologies. And Mohan's done a fair amount of work, basically in talking about the myths of blockchain. So I'd like to hear your comments, Mohan, about blockchain, and also if we can get some examples from you with regards to the emerging technologies. Mohan, please.
Thank you, Raj. Okay, so this slide is just giving you some of the background that you might want to follow up on in terms of the two topics that I'll talk about, which is blockchain and AI. There's a lot more material in terms of videos and slides. Next slide, please. So the blockchain area, has been undergoing a lot of exciting developments, especially in the last few years. It all started out about a decade ago with the emergence of the paper on Bitcoin. And what I found to be the most salient aspect of that work was the underlying data structure called blockchain, rather than the idea of totally unknown people remaining anonymous or pseudo-anonymous and taking part in blockchain network where things can happen in a very haphazard way with a lot of unpredictability in terms of performance and so on. These are the so-called permissionless blockchains, and this has been hyped up quite a bit, and the transaction rates are far, far less than what traditional transaction processing systems have supported. And there is also a lot of, in my opinion, greed kind of factors involved in the way this whole thing works in terms of rewards and cryptocurrency and things like that. But my assertion is that it's only the permissioned or the private blockchain systems that will really matter in terms of practicality and long-term sustainability. Uh, Having lived in Silicon Valley for 4 decades, I know the hype that goes on around here and in other parts of the world where people are trying to make a fast buck quickly and so on. So what I find exciting about the permission arena is that you have a network which is specifically for a particular use case. And as a result, only the people who have a reason to be part of that business process or workflow will be permitted with their identities known to be participants in such a network. And as a result of these sorts of restrictions being placed, these networks, or in the sense of these types of blockchain systems, have far better performance. They also hide the information from random people from getting to know. So in many such ways, they have a lot more deterministic behavior. They don't have the forking and all that problem that permissionless one. And it also avoids all the greed kind of factors that I mentioned before. And also in such a network, the problems with Byzantine behavior are a lot less of relevance, because the people that are participants, they have their reputation to worry about and so on. So you can always kick them out if they start misbehaving. Next slide, please. So I don't have the time to go through all these myths that have come about, which hype why permissionless networks are good and what's bad about permission networks, and this whole business about providing trust in a completely trustless environment. Lots of those things are really hype, and when you begin to deal with real world use cases with physical goods and so on, or for that matter, even recording information that comes from the real world into the blockchain, a certain amount of trust is needed. And also, you need centralized authorities or entities like courts and governments and all that to enforce certain uh, uh, restrictions, or serve as authorities to appeal to in case problems arise where what you expected was not the behavior that the product that you bought displayed, and hence you need to get your money back and things like that. And also, this whole notion of ICO became a ripoff in terms of people's money getting misused and things like that. So there are many other aspects to this, and I welcome you to look at the videos and the slides for which I gave the link in the first slide. And there you'll find a lot more expansion on these points that I made here. Next one, please. So this just shows you that the blockchain space, especially the permission blockchain space, has been deployed quite a bit. There are lots of production deployments, even though this kind of system has been around only for the last 3 to 4 years. unlike permissionless ones, which have been around for a decade. And I find that the use cases are not restricted by any means only to the financial industry. There are many other use cases. In particular, there are many government use cases also. Can we go to the next slide, please? Um, for instance, in Dubai, they are trying to go paperless with respect to government citizen interactions by the end of next year. They were originally aiming for end of this year. Next slide, please. You also have in places like my home state in India, Tamil Nadu, which is building up a backbone that will then be available for different departments of the government, as well as private companies and other entities in the state, or for that matter, from anywhere, to make use of that backbone in order to build use cases. There are similar things going on in Europe, and in particular, of course, countries like Estonia have also deployed lots of use cases on the blockchain. Next, please. The next topic I'm going to get into has to do with the artificial intelligence. We are now in the stage of AI 2.0, and I was at an event in November 2017 in Shanghai, soon after the Chinese once in 5 years community party congress was held. And so lots of officials as well as academicians and industry people and such were there. And China is really viewing the AI space to be one where they think they're going to do one upmanship on the Western countries, in particular the US. And they base this on the fact that they've collected so much information, Chinese Web 2.0 kind of companies, billion plus people, right, in China. They feel that whatever they've collected is going to be of relevance to the billion people in India and lots of people in Africa and South America. And so they feel that the Western companies have information that relates to more people who are richer and such, whereas what they have applies to a larger fraction of the world population. And so there's a fantastic talk that the then COO of Baidu gave. I highly recommend that you go take a look at the interview he gave, for which I put the link here. People like Raj Reddy, the only Indian who won the Turing Award, and he got it for AI back in '94. He gave a fantastic presentation also, which talks about why certain things that he thought won't happen in his lifespan have actually come about, and that has a lot to do with the sorts of things that I'll also mention in the next slide, which has to do with hardware developments, and there are many use cases, and also the availability of vast amounts of data of the kind that I mentioned before, as well as other kinds of information across the globe, thanks to leveraging IoT and such things, have also allowed for training and all that to be done much more effectively than what was believed would be the case a few decades ago. And there is also a lot of work going on in the space of AI for social good. And I've listed a few of the efforts that are underway. There was a fantastic conference that India's Prime Minister inaugurated a few weeks ago, which had people from across the globe participating on various use cases. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah. So there are many aspects to AI when you want to go from AI as it is applied to a very narrow use case to becoming really trustworthy and things like that, that have to do with how do you explain why the system recommended certain thing or came to a certain conclusion, especially in the healthcare space. Explainability is extremely important. You can't just say, I the system says you have cancer and I can't tell you exactly why it thinks that way, or your application for a loan got rejected, but I can't explain, on what basis that rejection decision was made. And there are also other aspects like people spooking the algorithms to make, for instance, a stop sign be interpreted as a go at 15 miles per hour max speed and things like that. There's lots of issues with respect to what kind of data you use to train your algorithms, which might be partial to one kind of people versus other kind of people and things like that. there's quite a bit of fancy hardware development that's going on that making it possible to handle bigger and bigger kinds of problems and also deal with lots more data when it comes to training. But at the same time, there are certain use cases where you don't have as much training data. So people are now inventing algorithms that will be able to make use of even smaller amounts of training data and still be able to come up with reasonable ways of doing pattern recognition and such. There's also efforts to take training that was done in one use case to be able to apply to other use cases. Next slide, please. There are many people who are now trying to dream up what the different kinds of trends are that you'll be seeing this year and next year and so on. A lot of that has to do with how to apply AI in the healthcare arena and come up with more and more accurate predictions and determination of looking at an X-ray, for example, and deciding whether the tumor that you see there is something to worry about or not, and how to do all this in a more cost-effective way. How to make people trust the algorithms, to also improve accuracy as well as efficiency, and how to make do with less amounts of data. And in the enterprise context, that's a bigger problem than if you're trying to recognize cats in pictures and things like that. And also how to leverage AI for making systems be self-managing. Even in the database systems, for example, people are working on how to make these database systems be a lot more user-friendly by making them self-governing and things like that. And there are also other things that have to do with the use of AI in manufacturing and drug discovery. I think I'll stop here.
Great, super. Thank you, Mohan. That was very, very informative. I know the topics are so broad here. We could be spending the whole day, but thank you again. That was very insightful. We'll come back again after this first round with some follow-on questions that we have. Next, I want to bring on Peter. Dr. Peter Lanier here. I'd like to hear your thoughts, Peter, on your work as an expert with the European Commission, and everybody now knows about the GDPR and the implications of data provenance, data privacy, data intelligence. And if you can shed some lights on the policies the government and the industry will have to start looking into as we get into these emerging technologies. So any discussion on that and how it impacts the general public, that'll be great. So Peter, you're up next.
Thank Raj. Well, my two colleagues here in the panel are going to highlight a lot of the technological advances. But what I would like to do here in the 5 minutes I have is identify the key vectors that will, and you can go to the next slide, that will define the future of data, right? So, and by actually looking back at some of key events that happened in the last 40 years. And of course, this diagram, there are many ways to present this, and the curves here are for illustrative purposes. But there are some indicators that there is, of course, a kind of a complexity effect to all the different vectors that we are seeing, which only amasses to the problem of data management in general. And I'm happy that I can rely here on Juan and Sid also to bring up a bit of the technologies that are very promising to resolve some of these problems. But I think we have mainly seen 3 eras, right? And I only experienced 2 out of 3 of them, right? I was only born in 1980. But I think we can actually, with comfort, identify the start of the data management era with the introduction of the PC and the LAN. And of course, IBM's data warehouse, right? This is where actually the growth of data started and the interest throughout the enterprise in data analytics. And this is where kind of the curve starts. But then actually we saw a second era emerging of data governance, right? which was triggered mainly by the 2008 crisis. And that was exactly the same year that I spun off my PhD and with some colleague researchers and students, Colibra, right? Because suddenly the crisis of 2008, it took a few years. By 2012, new regulations were put into place, which redefined the ways very large banks, financial institutes had to format, structure, and report data on their activities, right? The risks they take, but also the stress testing of these banks in a global economy in order to kind of prevent another systemic risk event. And then actually what we now see, everybody talks about data intelligence. There is no Wikipedia page for that. It's still mainly a to be defined term. But I think the crisis we see now, right, the COVID-19 crisis is an accumulation of a kind of a tipping point of something that was underway already, right, with what we saw with the opioid crisis over the last 15 years and SARS and so, where we actually increasingly see also the role of scientific data and the need for massive collective intelligence to actually predict so-called, well, macro events, but also particularly black swan events, right? And of course, it's a kind of a contradiction to say predict a black swan event, because by definition, they are only identified after the fact, where everybody say, well, we saw it coming, right? So, but data intelligence kind of announces a new way of using data for innovation, rather than the data governance era and management eras. It was mostly to structure it and to make sure you could actually report on what happened in the past, in the history, right? So I think I see three main forces here, which are probably more, but worth mentioning. They're kind of related to each other or orthogonal. But it's clear that emerging technologies we see are producing new options to use or value data, right? The business models, technologies are growing the data sphere, creating new business options for entrepreneurs. Secondly, we see internally diffusion of data responsibilities in companies, right? We see many new C-level titles that have something to do with data responsibility. And on site, we also see that GDPR is pushing a new kind of personal data control that companies will have to take into account. And we see now ways to actually use your genome data to invest in medical trials and drug development. I'm sorry, I'm a bit over my time. Just give me one more minute.
You're fine.
And then a third thing, of course, is also, as you look at these curves, we see increasingly the kind of technologies, and then the policies are, of course, always the policies to use technologies are outpacing the emergence of technology, but the time compression between these two is increasing. And that, of course, in a digital economy, smaller companies do not always have the capital, human or material capital, to implement these cycles and continue to compete. Next slide, please. So here are just some things that I think will be important on the next slides. I will quickly go over them. Of things we currently see, right? So we see the reports on antitrust of the big five, right? Google, Amazon, Facebook amassed monopolies and continue to conduct anti-competitive behavior. And it seems to be all centered around data and information, right? At the same time, we see increasingly investments in ICT, but it's not equally distributed. So that also might explain the decline in business dynamism we see in Europe and the United States, because of that high concentration of capital and human value creation from data in only a few companies, right? Then on the other hand, we see, of course, multi-platform innovation on many levels, right? So to counter that, right, Apple is announcing its first search. Many of you have seen the iPhone updates this morning or yesterday, which now includes an Apple search. We see IBM spinning off a cloud activity that will, of course, increase attention in the clouds competition. Can only benefit clouds. And of course, the emerging blockchain technologies might be helping us to further conduct data governance and validate exchanges and the veracity of information in general. We see data sharing embargoes, blocked IPOs, but then also on the other hand, the initiatives around open science clouds, which are important, and other important tension fields on the global level embargoes, but multilaterally between science institutes, we see a lot of data sharing. And the question here, when we talk about blockchain technology, can smart contracts be a way to generate automatically data exchanges to scale the many policies that data value chains have to go through? Because in the States, we see now many policies emerging. And then finally, I think, and this is also one of the reasons I'm working with Harvard, is to look at how can we actually educate business policy and data management programs to actually further a better understanding of data as becoming an essential resource, and see what technologies can help us automate it beyond data governance. So these are just some points I made. I'm sorry I'm going over my time.
You're fine, Peter. You're good. Yeah. Super. Well, thank you, Peter. I think we'll definitely come back with a few questions, but I think point well taken, Peter. The friction between the speed of the policy and the speed of innovations and the technologies, right? How do we make up? And that brings up a quick question, in terms of standardization of these things as we start implementing it. So that's great. Well, I will move on to our next panelist here, Dr. Sid Dalal. So Sid, I think I'd like to talk about using deep learning, deep analytics, AI, ML for machine learning, and to give you some, I guess, for the audience, the backdrop. Sid has been doing a fair amount of work in this area, and as we all know, there's lots of forms of data now, unconventional form of data that is coming through the web. Now we have pictures, videos, documents that are written in different languages. And then you have mobile apps. And then on top of that, you have data that is being collected from sensors and the IoT or the Internet of Things. And Sid has clearly stated in the past that this information sources with this kind of data is exploding. And for example, the amount of video traffic on the internet alone is going to become 82% of the total traffic according to Cisco. So Sid, I think if you could please discuss the application of deep analytics as you analyze the risks using this vast cache of new data, particularly how it applies to the public sector. So with that, Sid, on to you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate it. If we can move to the next slide, but just as a background, I understand that TI has a number of people who are entrepreneurs as well as CIOs and CTOs of various types. So I thought I'll just talk about some of the examples and successes they have been having in my own involvement as a part of it. And actually, and it has been just great that I've been able to work with many different companies, starting from Balcor to Xerox to RAND to AIG and so on. So that's just has been phenomenal number of different examples have come through, and many of them have actually started businesses based on some of the development which I have been involved in. So with that, I'll just talk about some of the opportunities you might want to think about. And just as examples, I'm going to talk about some of the opportunities I have been personally involved in. So for example, I'll just start off with really an interesting problem related to environment. And there has been tremendous amount of new chemicals and drugs which are coming every year out. And then of course we need FDA approval and we need NIOSH approval and the whole slew of things, just like we see in COVID in terms of vaccination and so on and so forth. And policymaking has become very, very complex, and there are a lot of pressures, and some of the problems have not been resolved for 20 years, where people can't decide whether a chemical is, the panels, government panels can't make a decision about it. So the idea was very simple, that can we come up, this was a public policy issue, where if you look at one of the classic example of the damage which can be caused is asbestos. And here you see amount of damage which can occur to your lungs on the top picture, and the kind of environmental thing where people have to clean up, and billions of dollars which are being spent, and hundreds of thousands of lives which have been lost due to asbestos. And to what extent can we identify those kind of things? So that was a challenge which really came about from public policy perspective. And I started getting involved with it. And then the question was, how do we think about such a problem? So if we move to the next slide, I'll just mention a little bit about the technology as a part of it. So as a part of it, we decided that the ideal thing would be to look at potentially all peer-reviewed scientific papers on chemicals of various types. And we went through PubMed, and we read, obviously, machine learning system of all types were developed, which read 20 million articles automatically, and tried to identify what chemicals are likely to be dangerous, and what kind of danger would be lurking behind, what kind of diseases they might be able to cause, and what were the ones which were not that harmful. So that was the basic idea behind it. And I'll just show you just examples. These are examples which are from coming out of that research. So for example, N-propyl bromide is the one which was replacing old dry cleaning agents. And that was supposed to cure all the environmental dangers of dry cleaning chemicals. And it turns out that it actually causes neural disorders of various types. And this was something which we could have shown by 2002, and not much was done by government for a long time. Same thing about, of course, bisphenol A. All of you know about. Anybody who has got a baby is afraid to use bisphenol A bottles at all. And it turned out that by 1994, evidence was very, very clear that reproductive cancer was potentially highly correlated with bisphenol A. And in fact, it can even be used in dental amalgamation and dental implant and everything else. So you have to be very, very careful. I can go on examples after examples. Diacetyl is a butter-like substance which is used in popcorn. So when you see that butter smell, that actually comes from diacetyl. And it turns out it can cause potential lung cancer. And this were all far before the evidence was very, very clear, far before any of the decisions by any of the regulatory agencies of various types. So you can see the amount of impact which it can have. And in fact, it was surprising that RAND being a non-profit company, we started actually for a profit company out of this. And actually it's doing extremely well, and called Predicate, which has got several hundred employees already now, and it has been doing very well. Let me go to another example, next one, which is more of, if we go to next slide, this is a sort of an interesting example from national defense perspective. And this was something which came out of my involvement with a number of defense agencies of various types. So as you know, around the world, we have been all concerned about terrorism. And one of the biggest concern has been related to dirty bombs. By dirty bomb, what I mean is basically radioactive material, which are not necessarily creating nuclear bomb, but these are the ones which are mixed with all kinds of other material, and they're exploded. And so the radiation hazard from that, nothing to do with nuclear explosion, but radiation hazard from radioactive material could be tremendous. For example, if such a bomb was exploded and middle of Washington or middle of New York, then part of New York and part of Washington would become uninhabitable for hundreds of years. So you can imagine kind of impact which it can have. And much of this material have been actually coming, potential for their coming is through variety of container ships of various types and with containers of various types. And there have been a number of cases which have been caught smuggling from Russia and other places after the math of Russian Union breakup and so on. So let me show you next slide here. So if we go to next slide, then if you look at it, every airport around the world and every port around the world has this kind of sensors. And these are the sensors called PVT sensors. And PVT sensors are the ones where a container would typically pass through with, and if it has got radioactive uh, material in it, then it will produce some sort of gamma rays. And you can take a look at a picture of the gamma rays, and then you can try to decide whether it's now dangerous or not, and they will declare it to be positive or not positive, and so on. If it fails, then one would have to physically inspect it. It turns out that this was the original idea, which started with uh, uh, customs and border control, where nuclear agencies are located. And as a part of it, what turned out that number of false positives, if you go to the next slide, number of false positives are enormous. 2 to 34% of some material are being falsely positive. And now you can imagine, well, false positive might be good, but you can imagine what happens is that whenever there are too many false positives, people will go and inspect and they'll find nothing. And after they find nothing, they will say, oh my God, this was just wastage of time. And all lines of trucks coming in at the border are just enormous and we can't stop. So you will just let it go. So number of false positives is not always a good sign. So the question was, can we create some sort of machine learning algorithm which would do that? And I was greatly involved with creating of such algorithm, which are partly used as a generalizations of those are partly used by the nuclear commission of and so on. And you can imagine the amount of success we have is in this table: weapons grade plutonium, high energy uranium, and so on and so forth. And we are almost able to distinguish with almost probability 1 in the examples we have tried out. So I just wanted to just point out, here is another opportunity, which is again from national defense perspective. Now let me, so here is, we started with NLP, now we have moved to sensors. Let me move to another one, which is even more interesting. And just, so if we go to the next slide, then let me talk about this. So this was an interesting example. So when I moved to the East Coast after from Rand Corporation at AIG, where they had wanted me to be there to think about the all world because of predicate, and they were very excited about it. So the Hurricane Sandy came, correct, at that time. As soon as I came, Hurricane Sandy came. So we decided to fly some helicopters. We decided to quickly decide about how much reserves should we keep and how much would it cost us, and so on and so forth, and how fast can we pay to our policyholders who are likely to be affected by all this. So here is a picture of part of the Long Island before and after. You won't be able to see too much of it, unfortunately. It's not high resolution for Zoom as well as for my PowerPoint itself. But we can see the amount of damage which is shown here, and we could predict in some fashion roughly that what kind of payout we might have to make. Roofs were destroyed, other things were done, flood damage was occurring, and so on and so forth. So the question was that, can we do this kind of thing in more general fashion? And what can we do? So I just got a patent actually last week on this whole subject. It just came out last week. So if you're interested, you can take a look at it. For construction work, we fly drones and we fly other kind of things as a part of it to collect the data and so on. Let me continue. One last example I want to just show you, which is next slide, which is a sort of very interesting area. If we go to next slide. Okay, here is a very interesting area. So this is really sort of potential for making a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So here is an area. So for example, at AIG, we used to have insurance across the world in terms of automobile and other places. And if whenever there is accident, usually we would have to send some sort of adjuster, and it would cost a lot of money to send adjuster if claim is small or a claim is large, like it's total destruction of the automobile. We're not talking about bodily injury. We are just talking about the property damage. So the idea was that if there is a damage is too small, we just give out a check. We don't even need to send adjuster. Or if the damage is complete, where the car is completely total, there is no sense in sending anything to the adjuster, because we might as well write off the check for the total value of the car and we are done with it. So can we do that automatically in terms of image? And if we can collect the images automatically sent by the body shop or by the customer themselves, then we'll be able to do it. And this has actually become very, very successful. And actually a patent was again issued around last year on this particular topic. So I just wanted to sort of talk about the whole round all the way, you can see the impact coming out all the way from natural language processing and drugs to sensors of various types, and then trying to look at sort of deep analytics as a part of it to images, and trying to identify the damages and other kind of things which can occur, which could be very, very valuable even in flood control and aftermath of flood, aftermath of fire, and so on and so forth for first responders. So that I think I just wanted to mention to you. The last one I'm just been very intrigued and very involved has been related to blockchains. Uh, permission less blockchains. And I've been just curious about all the ransomware attacks which are occurring, and people are paying them in terms of ransomware. To what extent can we identify ransomware players in some fashion, given the number of potential uh, handles people can have on networks like Bitcoin? And it's sort of a very, very intriguing. And actually, there are a lot of interesting work which is to be done, and actually some interesting results where we have some accuracy of around 90% has been obtained so far. So just with that, I'm going to just stop, but it actually branches off completely in graph machine learning, because if you want to think about networks like Bitcoin and so on, they're nothing but the graphs. And so how do we think about machine learning on graphs itself is a sort of an interesting area. So with that, I'm going to stop, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about the amount of opportunity you have in front of you is so enormous. I've just pointed out in each single case what is going on. But now you can think about multimodal, where you got images, you got audio, you got corresponding captions and language and corresponding sensors, and what can you do? So the sky is the limit, and I'm very, very intrigued by it, and I'm very excited about all practical applications. So with that, I'm just going to stop. Thank you so much. Perhaps I might have gone a little bit longer than my time, but I think this is pretty exciting.
It is great. So thank you, Sid. I think that was quite informative. And, Sid, as Sid mentioned, he is on a number of startup boards with his, he was a chief data scientist with AIG. So you can imagine the amount of experience is dealt with. And so anyways, I think definitely there'll be follow-ups for you, Sid, after the conference. So thank you very much. Now, I think we'll open up the panel here. Jennifer, if we can bring everybody on the panel on the video, and I'll go on to the next question here. Super, great. Well, I think this was we covered quite a bit of technical aspects of this trends in new technologies. I'd like to come back ask all the panelists in terms of number of entrepreneurs who are on the line here with us today. Maybe we'll keep it very short, and if you can tell 3 words that the audience today should remember when it comes to emerging technologies, and think of maybe perhaps the opportunities or the challenges that lie ahead. So I'd like to ask if you can comprehend in 3 words. So we'll start with Mohan first.
Don't go by hype. Look for really practical things. There's too much of a cottage industry in terms of people trying to make a fast buck. The ICO, having lived through, the Web 2.0 kind of phenomenon and the dot-com boom and bust, I am really worried about people trying to make a quick buck.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Super. That's great. Peter, your thoughts?
Sure. Well, like Sid said, the sky is the limit. Look behind him. That's further than the sky. But we have to also take into account and all the hype of exploring these technologies. We are consuming a lot of energy and a lot of efforts. I'm not going to say energy. And we might end up with many shallow options rather than true valid options for a long time. So my recommendation for many companies is now to look really carefully on what multimodalities they have in terms of data explorations, and make sure they have a clear intent for the future, right? That really can drive their company through crisis, because there's going to be more kind of turbulences to come, especially in the next 10 years.
So great, thank you. Sid, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Peter stole the words which are really outstanding. The sky is the limit. There is no question about that, Peter. Thank you for pointing that out. I think I just am not. I would disagree with Mahan, but just a little bit about permissioned versus permissionless. I think permissionless is the future in terms of public and a large number of public people who are involved in it, all the way from decentralized exchanges to decentralized prediction markets, and there are auctions of various types where everybody can participate and should participate. So I think that there are tremendous amount of opportunities in almost all of the things we have discussed today, all the way from Mohan and Peter, and the data, of course, is extraordinarily valuable. So I had no doubt about that. And sky is the limit, guys. We are here, Peter. Peter is the guru here.
Okay.
I've had tons of arguments with people across the globe, 14 countries, from youngsters to old people and public people to private people. I invite people to go look at my videos of all these engagements, even with Turing Award winner from MIT, Silvio Micali. I had a almost fist fight kind of thing in the Heidelberg Laureate Forum. So
Who
all
won?
those videos.
Kidding, sorry.
Definitely going to make for another exciting panel for sure.
That's right. That's fantastic. Super. I think that's so. Next question here. Dealing with the public sector or federal government market, right? There's always the question of standardization, policies. So, what are your thoughts? I mean, I think the challenge that I foresee in emerging technologies is, I think Peter, you pointed out, policies and regulations will never catch up, with the advent of technologies. So I would like to ask all of you, your thoughts, how does the governance of this emerging technologies come? Because the risks on that end, will fall onto the organizations that nobody is willing to take. So any comments, I'll open up.
Yeah. In my detailed talks, I talk about all this, but in the blockchain space, the biggest problem is that even in the private blockchain space or the permissioned ones, unlike in the case of relational databases when they came out, at least the conceptual model was defined by CORD, but the APIs might have been different between Ingress and DB2, for instance, to begin with. Whereas here, there isn't even agreement on the conceptual model. The only saving grace is that the Hyperledger Fabric has become like an extremely popular system. So in some sense, it's like a de facto standard, but there are competing ones. But in terms of blockchain as a service offering, everybody supports Fabric. So, but I agree. I mean, there are lots of issues with these sorts of things where governance and all that also needs to be taken into more care.
I just got a ping here, guys. I think we have just exceeded our time allocation here. I wasn't looking at the clock very well, but let's follow up on that. And we do have a number of questions, which we will follow up from the panelists. Okay, so I'm going to conclude the talk here. Manish, is that we are past our time, correct?
Yes, but that was a very, very interesting.
Okay.
So thank you everyone on the panel once again for your participation. We've been doing this conference from last 2 years, and it was in person. Last year, we had almost 350 people in a hotel. So in normal circumstances, we would obviously applaud, which I'm sure all the audience is doing for you right now, and we would felicitate you. But given the COVID situation we are in, what we are doing from a TIE DC perspective is we are committing a certain amount of dollars in the name of every panel and every panelist who spent time here, and we will be giving that to one of the charities that we work with. So again, thank you so much for your participation. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you,
to
Raj,
meet
for
you
having
all.
me. Thank you, Raj,
Thank you.
for having
Thank
me.
you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, Mohan.
So everyone else who's still in this session, please stand by for these sponsor messages. We would truly appreciate it. The next session will be at 12:45, and for that, you'll have to go to another session. But please stand by, hang around in this session for some sponsor messages. Jennifer, it's all yours.
And now we'd like to thank our gold sponsor, Bank of America.
We are continuously investing in our technology, processes, and people to combat ever-changing cyber threats. Cyber threats that can impact every region and industry, every business transaction, and digital interaction. That's why we use a holistic 5-fold threat management framework to keep information safe. Every stage is important, but it all starts with preparation and prevention. We're constantly analyzing threats and identifying ways that cyber criminals could strike, so we can take steps to close gaps, strengthen controls, and help stop cyber incidents before they happen. Detection and mitigation are the next layers. We continuously monitor networks, applications, and third parties for potential cyber activity. And we proactively engage and partner with law enforcement and help lead a broad industry coalition to make things safer. Should an incident occur, we would apply our well-rehearsed mitigation plan to ensure it's contained, and then we respond. Through constant preparation, our teams are ready to recover quickly so we and you can resume operations. Our threat management framework is ingrained in all we do and helps to strengthen the solutions that power your business. For example, our Cash Pro platform employs the strongest anti-fraud protection on the market. And we've added new commercial card security layers, including real-time alerts and greater user controls. We appreciate your business and your trust in Bank of America. In addition to keeping your information safe, we welcome the opportunity to talk to you about what you can do to protect your business and your customers.
And thank you to our platinum sponsor, Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. And a small correction, the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority was our virtual platform sponsor, and we thank them. And next up is a thank you to our bronze sponsor, Chuck.
Hello, everyone. I'm Navneet Chugh, managing partner at the Chugh firm. We're a law firm and as well as a CPA firm. We started the law firm in 1992 and the CPA firm in 1985. We have 4 pillars: corporate, tax, litigation, and immigration. And we do 15 other areas of law for businesses. And for individuals, we do criminal work, bankruptcy, and divorce. We have 300 employees with 114 lawyers and CPAs in 10 offices. And we believe in the 4 A's: being affordable, being able, being affable, and being available. Any legal, tax, or immigration issues ever, please call us or email us for a free consultation. Thank you.
And thank you to all of our sponsors for supporting TIE DC.